That's got to be one of my most favorite songs of the whole hymnal is How Great Thou Art. I can listen to that song over and over again. We used to attend Wichita Heights Baptist Church, and the pastor there, he could sing like nobody's business, and that was his favorite song, and I can still hear it in my head, him belting that out. And he just sang and sang and sang. It was just fantastic to listen to. As you know, I have a faux farm, and I've got lots of exciting things that happen on this farm. I've got Peter Wolf guineas. Guineas are supposed to be an alarm, tell you if something's wrong, and they alarm all the time. And they're loud. I don't know if you've ever heard a guinea, but they're extremely loud. So I call one Peter, the other Wolf, because they're always crying falsely. Yeah. But, Thomas Wheeler is here this week, and one of the things that I really appreciate about the scriptures that he gave was contentment, and how you need to be content in your situation, and content, and only then will you grow and follow where Christ wants you to go. My animals are not content. My animals are always thinking something's better on the other side of the fence. So it reminds me, as I give my animals what I think is the best, how God always gives me the best, and I'm not content with that. And how I'm always trying to go against God. So it is with my animals, always trying to go against me. But anyway, everything's going good on the farm. I have a lovely wife that takes care of me. I have this lovely Jonah and the great fish, or whale tie, because I'm going to speak on Jonah today. And I've got my farm socks on. So if you'd like to see my farm socks after the meeting, let me know. I'll let you see my farm socks. Keeps me clothed and keeps me going. Let's turn to Jonah. Last time we spoke about Jonah, we went over chapter 1. We're going to read chapter 1, and I was going to do real quick over chapter 2, just like I was chapter 1, and I thought I'm only going to get one page of notes out of chapter 2. I have 8. So, we're either going to have 2 parts or it's going to be a whirlwind. Jonah chapter 1. Now the word of Jehovah came unto Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry against it. For the wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah rose up to flee unto Tarshish from the presence of Jehovah. And he went down to Joppa, and he found a ship going to Tarshish, and he paid its fare, and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish from the presence of Jehovah. But Jehovah hurled out a great wind on the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship was about to be broken. Then the mariners were afraid, and cried, every man to his God, and cast the wares that were in the ship into the sea to lighten it of them. But Jonah had gone down in the lower parts of the ship, and laid down, and was fast asleep. So the captain came to him and said, What mean you, O sleeper? Arise and call upon your God. If so, that God will think upon us, and we perish not. And they said, every one to his fellow, Come and let us cast lots, that we may know whose cause this evil is upon us. So they cast lots, and the lot fell upon Jonah. Then said them unto him, Tell us, we pray you, for whose cause this evil is upon us? What is your occupation? And from where come you? What is your country, and of what people are you? And he said to them, I am a Hebrew, and I fear Jehovah, the Elohim of the universe, who has made the sea and dry land. Then the men were exceedingly afraid, and said to them, Why have you done this? For the men knew that he fled from the presence of Jehovah, because he had told them. Then said they unto him, What shall we do unto you, that the sea may be calm for us? For the sea raged and was tempestuous. And he said unto them, Take me up, and cast me forth into the sea. So shall the sea be calm for you. For I know that for my sake this great tempest is upon you. Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to bring it to land. But they could not, for the sea raged and was tempestuous against them. Therefore they cried unto Jehovah, and said, We beseech you, O Jehovah, we beseech you, let us not perish for this man's life. And lay not upon us innocent blood, for you, O Jehovah, have done as it pleased you. So they took Jonah up, and cast him forth into the sea, and the sea ceased from raging. Then the men feared Jehovah exceedingly, and offered a sacrifice unto Jehovah, and made vows. Now Jehovah had prepared a great fish to swallow up Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Then Jonah prayed unto the Lord his God out of the belly of the fish, and said, I cried by reason of my affliction unto Jehovah, and he heard me. Out of the belly of Sheol I cried, and you heard my voice. For you had cast me into the deep, in the midst of the seas, and the floods surrounded me. All your billows and your waves passed over me. Then I said, I am cast out of your sight. Yet I will look again toward your holy temple. The waters surrounded me even to the soul. The deep closed around about. The weeds were wrapped around my head. I went down to the foundations of the mountains, and the earth with her bars closed about me forever. Yet you have brought my life up from corruption, O Jehovah my God. When my soul fainted within me, I remembered the Lord, and the prayer came unto you into your holy temple. They that regard vain idols forsake their own mercy. But I will sacrifice unto you with a voice of thanksgiving. I will pay that I have vowed. Salvation is of Jehovah. And Jehovah spoke to the fish, and it vomited out Jonah on the dry land. Very interesting historical book. I like to say that instead of a story. I want everybody to know this is an actual account. We talked about this the first time. That it actually names Jonah. It gives him identity. It's a real person in history. And this did happen. And we'll find out in a subsequent message some interesting stuff about this. I know I'm not supposed to do that, but you know. Anyway, we see the love of God throughout all of chapter 1. It looks like everything's bad here. It is. Jonah's disobeyed God. Jonah's gone down. Instead of going up, Jonah's gone down. He's messing things up. God is able to take that and make it for good. God had the right to terminate Jonah as soon as he disobeyed. But for the love of God and mercy of God, he used Jonah in his disobedience for his glory. And we see out of that the sailors were saved. They all made vows. They all sacrificed unto Jehovah. They recognized who God was. Last time we ended in verse 16, right after the men made vows. I find it interesting that it says that he cast them into the sea, and the sea quit its raging. And then the sailors sacrificed. They didn't even see the fish swallow Jonah. They were already rejoicing and knew who he was just from the sea. It says in 17, now the Lord prepared a great fish and swallowed Jonah up, and Jonah was in the belly 3 days and 3 nights. I'd like to take this chapter 2, and I think this is a good place to do a typology study. I see that there's a correlation between Jonah and Jesus. And I see a direct correlation, and I see a contradicting correlation. And we'll get into that as we go here. If you turn over to Matthew chapter 12, 38 through 41, we have a place where Jesus himself compares himself to Jonah. There was certain of the scribes and of the Pharisees answered, saying, Master, we would see a sign from thee. Now remember, Jesus has been doing signs and miracles throughout the entire first part of this chapter. In fact, just before this, he has relieved 2 men of evil spirits. And they're saying that he's doing it because he was part of the devil. And they said, we want to see a sign. He's been showing them signs this whole time. But he answered unto them, and to them, an evil and adulterous generation seeketh after a sign. There shall no sign be given to it, but the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the great fish's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. I find this next verse very interesting. The men of Nineveh shall rise in judgment with this generation and shall condemn it, because they repented at the preaching of Jonah. And behold, a greater than Jonah is here. So even the people in Nineveh repented, and the scribes and Pharisees had not. So here we have Jesus compared himself to Jonah. mainly 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the well. So I'd like to look at that. Jesus was asked for a sign, and he's been doing miracles everywhere. He had healed the blind and dumb and possessed people. Even though Nineveh was ultimately destroyed in Nahum, at this time these people had a genuine conversion in Nineveh. Let's start comparing Jonah and Jesus here. Jonah, God told Jonah to rise and go into Nineveh. And we see Jonah partly obeys. He arises, but then he goes down. He went down to Joppa. Joppa is about a 500-mile trek from Nineveh. He went down further. He went into the boat, down in the bottom of the boat. He went even further down. He went into the sea, into the belly of the fish, and he went down even further to the heart of the sea. It says that he was at the base of the mountains. You know what's interesting about this? It wasn't until the 1950s that we found out there was mountains in the sea. The Word of God knew there was mountains in the sea. It was already told that there was mountains in the sea. I find that fascinating how we think we're so far advanced and how we know everything. And we find that God's Word has always known everything. It's kind of like the world being round. It says in the Bible that the world is a sphere. Brother Jim is speaking on Noah. It says in the Bible that the fountains of the deep. It wasn't until 1900s we found out there was fountains in the ocean. God the Father told the Word, God the Son, the second person of the Trinity, to go down to earth. He immediately obeyed, and he went down. He went down to earth, and he went down even further. He became a man. And the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. He went down even further. He died on a cross. And being found, fashioned as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. And he went down even further. He went into the heart of the earth. You say, well, what is in the heart of the earth? We have a place called Sheol. In the King James, sometimes it's translated as hell. Sometimes it's translated as the grave. It was a place where pre-cross people were. There was a place called paradise. If you remember in this account of Lazarus, where Jesus tells about the rich man and Lazarus and how they went, when they both died, one went to paradise in Abraham's bosom and the other went to a holding place, and they could see each other, and they could talk across this. Many people believe that this is in the center of the earth, and I wouldn't argue with that. I think that that's a totally possible thing. It says in 2 Peter 2:4, it casts them down to hell. In Psalm 55, go down alive into hell. Isaiah 14:15, yet thou shalt be brought down to hell in the sides of the pit. We see descend into the pit. Those who go down into the pit, they go down alive into the pit. Jesus would say to the thief on the cross, today you shall be with me in paradise. Sheol, or Hades, or pit, a place where saved and unsaved resided before Jesus' death and resurrection. In Ephesians 4:8 and 9, wherefore, he saith, when he ascended up on high, he led captivity captive, and gave gifts unto men. Now that he ascended, what is it but now he also descended first into the lower parts of the earth. He that descended is the same also that ascended up far above all heavens, that he might fulfill all things. That captivity captive, that's an unusual phrase. That's something that doesn't really make sense unless you understand ancient war. And when they would go in and they would capture POWs from that wherever they were attacking, they would lead them around in chains. They were the captive. And remember when David went and rescued those people? That's called rescuing the captivity captive. You recaptured those that had been captured. When Jesus went to the heart of the earth, he led the captivity captive. He took those people out of paradise and sent them up to heaven because he's paid the price for sin. He has triumphed over all the enemies, Satan, sin, and death, which he had before all the enslaved world. And they also gave spoils. So not only do you rescue, but you take all the spoils and you distribute the spoils to everybody. In return for victory, he gave gifts unto men. He gave ordinary and extraordinary gifts of the Spirit. Jesus literally descended into Sheol and led those captive in paradise to the Father's side in heaven now. That sin has been paid for. Both of them went down and then up. Jonah went down, down, down. Then he went up to Nineveh and did what he was supposed to do. Jesus went down, 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 and then up where he is exalted on high, sitting at the Father's right hand. 3 days and 3 nights. It boggles my mind that it says in verse 17 that he was 3 days and 3 nights in the fish, and then verse 1 says, then he prayed. I think I would have been praying as soon as I hit the water. But I think that Jonah's purpose was to die. I think that he wanted to not to go to Nineveh so much. He would rather die. And you see that throughout this whole book. You're going to see at the end that when he sees that Nineveh repents, he wants to die. It amazes me the hatred that there is for the Ninevites. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One, we talked about how evil they were. But I think it also offended Jonah that God would forgive Gentiles. They thought pretty high of themselves because they were God's chosen people. This whole time, Jonah has not prayed to God. He boarded a ship, he never prayed to God. He was asleep during a wrathful storm that was there on his account. I look at that and I think, I can get pretty comfortable in sin too. Jonah was pretty comfortable in his sin there, wasn't he? He was thrown into the sea. He hasn't even prayed to God since he's been thrown into the sea. He's swallowed by a fish. 3 days and 3 nights, and then he prays to Job. Why did he pray? Because he was in distress. Not because he wanted to talk to God. But he was in a bad way. Because he was in hell. He was in torment. He was in Sheol. He was fully expected to die. And I think because he did not die, he says, okay, you win. You win. And then he prays to God. Unlike that, Jesus was in constant communication with the Father. Jesus always conferred with the Father on everything. Jesus did the Father's will. He prayed to the Father before his distress. How many times do I wait until I'm in distress before I pray to God? Jesus prayed to God before his distress. Jesus prayed to God the Father while he was on the cross, in his distress. Jesus was in constant communication. Sometimes I think that people, including myself, and when you point, you always have to look at the 3 fingers pointing back at you, is that I have God in my pocket and he's my genie. And once I get into a problem, I rub that bottle, I need help. But you know how nice it is to be in communication with God all day? It's a hard thing to do. Have a constant prayer to God. Include Him into everything. We depend on Him for everything, good and bad. He is in control. Even when it's good for us, when we think that things are going right, we should be in communication with God. Amen. God supplies for all of our needs. Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights because of his own sin. Jonah brought this upon himself. God told him to do something and he refused to do it. Jesus was in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights for the world's sin. It wasn't for his own sin. He took our punishment on himself. Why 3 days and 3 nights? Why was that an important thing? Time in the grave was very important back then. As you study the resurrection of Jesus, and that's something that we will be studying at the end of this semester in FBI class, is that there's a lot of people that would say something to the effect of, well, you know, Jesus didn't actually die on the cross. He swooned, or he fainted, and his believers brought him back to life, or resuscitated him, or whatever. But there's a time period of when somebody was considered to be dead. And think of it like this. Remember when Lazarus was sick, and they sent word to Jesus, the disciple, the one that you love is sick. Lazarus is sick. Come quickly. And Jesus says, we're going to wait. And he waited. And then Lazarus died. Then Jesus went. And it was 4 days later. 4 days. Jesus waited on purpose. Jesus wanted to show people that Lazarus was dead. He was, in fact, deceased. He wasn't fainted. He didn't swoon. There wasn't some trickery going on. This isn't a hoax. He's been dead 3 days. In fact, he was in a tomb with a stone rolled across it too. This was a true miracle. This was a true resurrection account. Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. There was no denying this. In fact, after this, we find the Pharisees and those of that sect wanted to kill Lazarus. 3 days and 3 nights. He was in there 3 days and 3 nights to prove that he had died. There was a Roman seal put on the stone. There was no way to get in and out. It was proof that Jesus had died. I cried by reason of my affliction unto Jehovah, and he heard me. Out of the belly of Sheol I cried. God heard him. As a Christian, God is with you everywhere. Even if you're backsliding, and keep this in mind, just as we talked about this week, stretching forward and going on, if you're not doing that, you're backsliding. If you're staying the same, you're actually going backwards. You ever been in a race? If you stop moving, you get further and further behind. You're either stretching forward or you're sliding backwards. There is no standing still. But God will still hear you. God will hear you in your state. As an unsaved person, no matter what sin you have committed or how evil you think you are, God will hear you and will save you. Jesus paid it all on the cross. God will forgive you. God can forgive anything. God will give you righteous robe and take your rags upon himself. It says, For thou hast cast me into the deep, in the midst of the seas, and the floods compassed around me, and all thy billows and thy waves passed over me. Jonah finally realizes that he's in a very big predicament. He's not going to die. He's praying for help now. He has realized that his sin has put him there. I find that sin gets bigger and bigger. We start with little things, and it just progressively gets worse and worse. And I think it even comes down, the Bible talks about the third and fourth generation. As I do little sins, the next generation compounds on top of that sin and makes it even worse. And as you can see, we're just gone off the slope now. As a world, we have gone further down than I ever thought I would see in my life. It just amazes me how big sin can get and how everybody is stuck in the sin. It's sin snowballs out of control. Then you're flooded and drowning in sin. He realizes that God is punishing him. It says in here, all thy billows and waves pass over me. God is judging him. God is punishing Jonah for this. He's being punished for his disobedience. Jesus on the cross. Not because of his own sin. Our sin put him on the cross. Jesus was the only sinless human. We had a discussion about that today in our small groups. Jesus did no sin. There was nothing he did that deserved death on the cross. But God made him sin for us. That's a unique thing to say, isn't it? It's hard to get your mind wrapped around that God made him sin. It's the idea of imputed. God took our sin that was in our account and put it on Christ. And Christ's righteousness was put onto us. We exchanged them. Jesus suffered and died for my sin. Jesus was punished by the Father for our sins. Took our place. We should have been punished. Jesus bore the wrath of God so we wouldn't have to. This whole time, Jonah's been running from God. It says, I've been running from the face or the presence of Jehovah or the Lord. It says, I am cast out of your sight, from your presence. Isn't this what Jonah wanted? Wasn't he trying to get from the presence of God? Wasn't he running from God? And here he is in the deep, in the belly of a fish, and he says, I'm cast out of thy sight. That's what Jonah wanted. But he didn't understand that's something he didn't want. This is what hell will be. Eternal separation from God. To flee from the face of Jehovah. Not only that, but eternal hellfire and brimstone. It's not going to be a great place. I think as much as the physical torture will be, the mental torture of knowing that God is not there. Knowing that you're going to be separated from that forever. We see hopelessness and despair. We see it very much in this world. Just with the world without God has no hope. They have nothing to cling for. The world they embrace anything that they try to find meaning in. Something to give them value. Value is only determined on what somebody would give for it. God gave his son for you. You have immense value. The value has been deemed by God. Jesus was forsaken by God. Why hast thou forsaken me? Jesus endured the separation from God. The Father did not step in to help him, but allowed him to suffer for the sins of all of us. What a horrible thought to be separated from God. I look at this world and I see my little area with all the animals, and you can't help but to see God in everything. Just like Danny was talking about these flowers. As you study and learn about this stuff, it makes you more and more appreciative of who God is and what He does. To imagine that the creator of the universe would be separated from you. Yet will I look towards your holy temple. Jesus knows there is forgiveness in the Lord. Jonah knows there's forgiveness in the Lord. Jesus knew He would rise again in victory. Utter despair. Jonah says, the water surrounded me, even to my soul. Seaweed was wrapped around my head. He completely helpless. He realizes that God will not let him die. He realizes that this is the time to call him to God. Jesus in Psalms 22 says, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Why art thou so far from helping me? I am poured out like water. All my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It is melted in the midst of my bowels. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue cleaveth to my jaws. Thou hast brought me into the dust of death. I went down to the bottom of the mountains, and the earth with her bars was about me forever. Jonah's as far away as he can physically get from God. He's as far away as he can spiritually get from God. God brought Jonah up from corruption. I bet you Jonah was a pretty ghastly sight. He was laying in corruption for a long time. 3 days, I don't know, that's a long time to be sitting in some hydrochloric acid juices. That'll play into our next message. I can only imagine what he looked like. Probably some crazy white, bone white. Oh. Jesus, the Son, was as far away from the Father as he could be. He took the place of the wrath of God upon himself. But Jesus did not see corruption. In Acts 21, Acts 2:25 says, for David spoke concerning him, I foresaw the Lord always before my face, for he is on my right hand, that I should not be moved. Therefore did my heart rejoice, and my tongue was glad. Moreover, also my flesh shall rest in hope, because you will not leave my soul in Hades, or Sheol, neither will you allow the Holy One to see corruption. Jonah saw corruption, didn't he? The Lord did not see corruption. When my soul fainted within me, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came unto thee into thy holy temple. When my soul fainted within me. The full soul here talks about the whole being, physical and spiritually. I think Jonah was feeling the edge of death, the edge of going on. Some people believe that at some point Jonah had died here. And I don't know that I would just go and argue against them in a mean, dogmatic way. But I also think that if Jonah had died, he would have been in paradise. I don't know that he would have been praying for help. So I think that Jonah did not die, and that he was in here, and he was repentant and ready to give up. Jonah comes to the end of himself, and he calls for help. God is always waiting with arms open. If you do something, you commit sin, God is always waiting there for you to restore you. God is always waiting on sinners. It says that one lost sheep we talked about earlier that went astray. The one lost sheep Jesus went out and found. God is always waiting on sinners who need a Savior. God loves all and will forgive all. Here Jesus cries, it is finished. He bore and paid it in full. God accepted Jesus' suffering on the cross, and Jesus then yielded up the ghost. They that observe lying vanities forsake their own mercy. Lying vanities would be idols, would be like idols of the flesh or intellect or ambition, pride, self-will. We see that in Jonah. He had a lot of pride in himself as an Israelite. Self-willed. He didn't want to do God's will. Lying vanities, breath and wind, which none can grasp or detain. Vanishing like air into the wind. Stuff that's not tangible. Their own mercy would be equal to God. Those that seek after idols forsake God. The ultimate source of mercy, the only one that could have so much love and so much grace and so much mercy. Jonah then says, but I will sacrifice unto thee with the voice of thanksgiving. What did Jonah have to sacrifice to God in the belly of a fish? Himself. He sacrificed himself. We talked about this during the week. He died to self and followed God, and he did it with thanksgiving. He would happily pay that which he vowed. His life, which God had given him back, to the obedience of the rest of his life in all things. I love this. Salvation is of the Lord. Salvation is of Jehovah. I find it interesting that it says that Jehovah spoke to the fish and had vomited Jonah out on dry land. And I think, when you think of a fish big enough to swallow a man, that's a pretty big fish. And when you think about the beach, there's a long distance that you can walk out into the water before it gets deep enough to have a fish that big. So, did the fish scoot up on there, or did it projectile vomit him onto the beach? I can kind of see Jonah flying through the air and landing there on the beach. But I'll leave you with this. Salvation is of Jehovah. Though Jesus is similar to Jonah, he is much greater. Whereas Jonah was a disobedient prophet who ran from his mission to the lost, Jesus was the true obedient prophet who came and seek and to save the lost. Whereas Jonah was thrown into the sea to calm the wind and waves, Jesus told the wind and waves to be quiet, and they obeyed his voice. Whereas Jonah received judgment for his rebellion, Jesus takes the punishment for our disobedience. Whereas Jonah experienced a figurative death and burial in the fish, Jesus was literally crucified, proclaimed dead, and buried in a tomb. Whereas Jonah was vomited out on dry land, symbolizing new life, Jesus walked triumphantly from the grave. Whereas Jonah proclaims coming judgment, Jesus proclaims forgiveness of sins through his death. Ultimately, Jonah experienced judgment for his own sins, but by his judgment, the sailors were saved. Jesus lived a life without sin, but at his death, he experienced judgment for the sins of the world in order to save the world. Kind of a dynamic picture. They're kind of the same, but they're not. Jesus is much more excellent. Jesus is waiting for you to come to him today. Jesus accepts all. There is nobody that Jesus cannot save. Come to him today. Father, thank you for this morning that we can come together and meet and study your word and learn more about you and your love and your grace and your mercy, Lord. We all need your grace. Lord, as we go out into the world this week, let us be salt and light and show your grace and mercy to those that are around us and proclaim your great gospel, that your great salvation to all. Free gift of salvation. Lord, thank you for this time and keep us safe as we go out through the world this week. In Jesus' name.